Hey everyone and welcome back. For today's video I created a PowerPoint. So basically I wanted to talk about Affinity and how Pauper format evolved since I started playing in it in 2015. Because from my point of view, Pauper has some problems, but those problems it's just Pauper is an old commons format, so you can't expect that Wizard will print the same exact kind of cards that are printed in other formats when it comes to have an answer to something which can be a nuisance for you. So of course we are talking about Affinity and why is this deck so broken, or rather why when you try to create a new deck or to create some content for Pauper, Affinity can be troublesome because you need to have a lot of hate against Affinity or a positive matchup against Affinity, but similar to how Flickertron had everything needed to beat any kind of archetype, Affinity is in the same position right now. So Affinity right now is the most efficient deck. I compared it with Dimir Delver. The Dimir Delver, which was banned and was playing Gash, Daze, and other hyper efficient cards. Affinity right now is not anymore an aggro deck and is playing and still has one of the best aggressive gameplay thanks to Mirror Enforcer, and also has the best value gameplay in the format thanks to cards like Turquoise and Blood Fountain, and can also be the best anti-aggro deck thanks to cards like Galvanic Blast, Sharpen Shaman, and Luminations, and of course thanks can play a large variety of 8 cards, can also be considered to play very specific 8 cards in sideboard, example Weather the Storm. I wrote a note about artifact lands here because I think that the artifact lands are the enabler of the whole deck, not only the Affinity cards, Mirror Enforcer and Toolcast, but also everything else. So basically this deck without the artifact lands will be much easier to deal with it, because will be slower and it will not have every time enablers for Crocodile Shaman, Munitions, or even Galvanic Blast, because your lands can be an enabler for Deadly Dispute or Reckoner's Bargain, and you can also kill creatures or deal damage with Munitions thanks to your lands. And also thanks to your lands, to your artifact lands, you are able to play an early game Mirror Enforcer, I mean by turn 3 for example, and by having a couple of Frogmites or Enforcer by turn 3, you are able then to win by turn 6. And that's only because you have artifact lands, and those artifact lands really speed up the aggressive gameplay of the deck alongside all the other parts of the deck, both the value part thanks to Toolcast and Dispute and etc., and also the anti-aggro part thanks to Crocodile Shaman and Galvanic Blast and so on. The deck is just too much efficient, so it's difficult to find which is the most broken card. And an important part about this video is basically keeping in mind the point of view of Wizard of the Coast, because from the Magic play design it's obviously easier to to make broken artifacts compared to the other permanent type or non-permanent cards. Wizard in the recent years started to improve dramatically the power level of every single card in Magic, and they also started making more powerful cards at common rarity. As you can see, most cards are also developed for the draft or for the sealed, so for the limited formats, but there are some cards that are not meant for limited size, for example Bonder's Ornament or Ash Barons, but those cards are a land, Ash Barons, and an artifact, Bonder's Ornament. Bonder's Ornament was thought as a card advantage or mana fixer for multiplayer formats, Commander, but was working fine enough in Pauper because was a really good card in Tron and also in some nice niche archetypes, for example Pestilence Control, and even in decks with Korsky Fisher and even non-Korsky Fisher deck, and decks, mid-range decks like, for example, the old John mid-range Cascade. Bonders got the XP because Wizard wanted to cut some power level from Flickertron, but keeping it alive. Well, Flickertron is not much played, maybe was the right decision to ban Bonder's Ornament, but from my point of view, Flickertron is not much played right now, mostly because they banned Flick Prism, but also because the format is just too powerful right now, so probably it's difficult for Flickertron to basically try to fight against a large variety of different archetypes. Flickertron is a control deck, so its main problem was just most times trying to figure out against which deck you wanted to have enough 8 in your sideboard or eventually in your main deck. And right now we have very different decks, from ephemerate decks to a very aggressive deck to decks with a lot of card advantage. And right now I think that it's difficult to have a Tron deck which isn't X-Tron, I mean well positioned in the format, and if you want to play a control-ish deck, it's probably just better to play something with Dust in the sideboard, because you can also have Fangry Marauder in your Tron sideboard, but usually when you try to have enough 8 against Affinity, you are basically dropping 8 for non-affinity decks, and for that reason I think that is pretty difficult for Flicker and Tron. Anyway, cards like Experimental Synthesizer and Astrolabe are both 1 mana artifacts that were developed for limited, well, very different limited environments, since Astrolabe was printed on Modern Horizon 1 and was meant to have an extra snow permanent for this new archetype unlimited, and also Astrolabe was banned because was breaking the way of mana works, because Wizards want that when you play a multicolored format you are paying a cost to play those lands, and by playing Astrolabe you were too much free to play a 3-color deck or a 4-color deck without running too many shock lands or fetch lands or dual lands, so whatever. synthesizer is not is not really meant to have a better early game. Is more like a card advantage card, and in limited isn't really broken because it's just a late game card, and unless you are playing an artifact based deck, you just try to play it in by turn 8 or even later. In constructed formats is pretty different because the card is more powerful than Coral Spring, probably because you can play it in very aggressive decks, very aggressive strategies, and by having a low mana curve you can just get so much card advantage or value from it. An example, decks like this recent mono red aggressive deck, mono red Sly or mono red Goblins, but also Burst Venturecraft with a lot of blinking stuff, birds, creatures. Well, Experimental Synthesizer is a broken card, and also people started to wonder if it needed a ban. In my opinion, Synthesizer is not near to be broken in Pauper right now. Was seen some play in Affinity, but right now it's played mostly in non-Affinity decks. Well, I wanted to clarify that in my opinion at least, what would be really awesome to have in Pauper to deal with Breach and other artifact lands would be something like Stony Silence, but it's pretty obvious that Stony Silence will be never printed in Pauper for two reasons. There's no apparent reason to have Stony Silence in draft, and you really need to have a weaker effect compared to Stony Silence to have the same kind of card in limited with a lot of artifact synergies at least. The problem about Stony Silence is that you don't really have enchantments 8 in limited, but also you prefer to have on a creature the same kind of artifact 8 when you try to have it on limited, because by giving it to a creature you make it easier to destroy it. But also limited, it's difficult, as I already said, to have a creature with some powerful ability, because having good creatures in draft is of course difficult, and making too many good creatures in draft will make eventually will probably just create a new constructed format. Just think, for example, about Modern. They printed the Evoke Elemental creatures in Modern Horizon 2, and those were mythic cards, and those cards alongside, for example, Ragavan and Murktide and Darcy, they basically created a new Modern format, and those weren't even commons because they have a power level clearly better, clearly higher than common cards. And in Pauper we really have only Dust to Dust, Gorilla Shaman and Gleeful Sabotage as a way to deal with more than one artifact at the same time. But Dust to Dust is not near as efficient as any other modern or legacy 8 cards when it comes to dealing with those lands. So basically we just miss enough 8 to deal with the artifact bridge, with the artifact lands. But let's not even talk about how much is stupid to give Indestructible to a dual land. I mean, you were worried to let your opponent in limited destroy your lands is kind of dumb, because okay, you are playing limited and not constructed, but it's obvious that when you are playing some dual lands or whatever, you are taking some kind of a gambit. I mean, it's clear that when you are playing a dual land, that your opponent can destroy it with Wasteland. Is not construct legacy is not limited, but why not make it difficult here to in Modern Horizon 2 limited to get advantage from Dropsburg Bridge or all the other lands? I mean, you also printed Gorilla Shaman. If the problem was Gorilla Shaman, just don't print Gorilla Shaman in the set. Oh, well, whatever. Anyway, when you are playing Dust to Dust, is kind of difficult to profit from it, even if you exile 2 lands, because you need to put some pressure on the battlefield. If you don't, Affinities just has so much card advantage that would be probably even impossible to win before the drawing all lands. I mean, a deck that basically is no more the same affinity that it used to be, but it runs something like 20 cards that get 2 for 1, can clearly draw enough cards to overcome a single Dust to Dust. So basically, Affinity moved from having only 4 tokens to having 12 copies of tokens, and right now they only have 9 beatdown creatures in form of 4 Frogmite, 4 Enforcers, and 1 singleton copy of Gurmagangler. Okay, sometimes they run Gearseeker Serpent instead of Frogmite, and maybe they have also second copy of Gurmagangler, but they clearly have a less amount of creatures compared to the old days. And right now it's just a value deck, but they have 0 mana creatures compared to the other value decks that they need to spend mana to cast their creatures, and other value decks are focused on having 2 for 1 creatures. Affinity doesn't really need to have value creatures. They have 0 mana creatures, and they can eventually sacrifice them with Dispute or Rakonor's Bargain just to counter one Rumble Spell from their opponent. And the other value decks aren't they can't really try to compete with a deck that has so much card advantage. So most times any value deck just play some big catchy cards or big impacting cards in forms of, for example, Monarch or Ninja of TT Powers can also be considered a card with a huge impact, because if you don't have an answer to Ninja of TT Powers or Monarch, your opponent will probably just draw a lot of cards. And I also consider value cards, Mulldrifter and Pestilence or similar cards, because Mulldrifter is a 3 for 1 creature. It draws 2 cards and put 1 permanent onto the battlefield, similarly to the Dispute, which creates a treasure token and draws you 2 cards. But there's also Pestilence, because I think that Pestilence, similar way to Dragon Shaman, can create a sort of card advantage by destroying more than 1 creature with only a single card. But the problem about Pestilence is that you need to pay a lot of mana just to deal with that many creatures. So basically, if you're playing a value card, you need to have a beatdown strategy, or have something that eventually can generate a board state where you are getting a huge advantage. That huge advantage, what can be, in example, Battle Screech. If you play Battle Screech and flashback it, and your opponent doesn't have a full Cannonade, you can deal a lot of damage with Relative Defeasant. That's also a proper beatdown strategy. But there's also the Monarch, the initiative eventually, and also cards like Pestilence, if you're playing mid-range Pestilence. Of course, mid-range Pestilence is not really well positioned against Affinity, but I faced a lot of Affinity with mid-range Pestilence, so I can say that the matchup is not so bad as you may think. It's still terrible, because they may have a nut start with a lot of card advantage or a lot of creatures in a later game, and you're gonna lose. But if they don't have a fast start, you can play your Monarch, get some card advantage, play your Koski Fishers and Horsing, and just deal so much damage that you win, playing around their creatures. Similarly to how Boros Meta card works. But if you don't have a beatdown strategy, most times don't try to grind Affinity. Unless maybe you are playing an Ephemerate deck. Ephemerate deck can grind Affinity because you can blink stuff like Drifter or Archemancer, and if you blink Archemancer with a counterspell, an example, you can counterspell lock your opponent if they don't have enough cards in hand. And if you don't play a value deck, but that is still trying to win by beatdown, probably you need to play around Kraken Shaman in any kind of way you may think. So, example, if you play Elves, you may want Hydroblast in your sideboard to counter Kraken Shaman or Makeshift Munition. If you don't play Elves, maybe you want to play around the Kraken Shaman by winning first, or by playing Cyndail Edgewalker plus Elephant Guide, or just playing Buggles with a huge ton of value, a huge ton of auras, or maybe just try to play Burn and hope that your opponent don't draw enough life gain, because Burn is good against value decks when they don't draw their life gain, unless they're playing Fairies. Fairies is really well positioned against Burn. So, in conclusion, Pauper is way different from how it was when I started playing it. When I started playing it plus Sentinel Throne of Black Rose, they weren't already legal. When I printed it, we weren't really sure how the Monarch was gonna do in Pauper, but then people started playing it in Boros with Koski Fisher, and also people started playing it in Pestilence, mid-range Pestilence, because Control Pestilence wasn't played at that time, and it was also started seeing play in more Black Devotion. Monarch was terrible at that time, but not terrible, I mean, not terrible as unplayable, but terrible to face because mid-range strategies were pretty good, and Ephemerate wasn't already legal, so you needed something like Ghostly Flicker to have enough card advantage to match the Monarch card advantage. So for that reason, most people wanted a Monarch ban, but they never banned Monarch if you exclude Fall from Favor. Right now, when Affinity can draw so many cards, and you can also have the ability to play Ephemerate or the Monarch, or even unfair decks like Cycle Storm or Extron, well, probably Affinity is fine, and maybe of course Affinity is fine, why not Ephemerate or the Monarch? As I said, Pauper was a 2-for-1 format, but right now, Pauper, if you want to compete with value decks, having only 2-for-1 probably is not enough. You need something that is able to stop your opponent from getting value from their cards, or something that force them to deal first with your board state instead of getting card advantage. So aggressive value decks are right now very good, and also non-interactive decks are really good, and that is making the format kind of weird, because we have on one side value and interactive decks, and on the other side non-interactive decks. An example, Bird Xproof, or when it comes to value decks, Affinity, Boros, even ephemeral decks. And the format, as always said, is everywhere, because when I started playing Pauper, the format was very different, at least regarding the card advantage. And having a Pauper which isn't the value town as used to be, but having a format which has so many well, maybe you can call them engine, but most times it's just value piles or piles of decks that are trying to do something really flashy that in a way or in another can win the game. Well, it's kind of weird, but it may be interesting. Probably we just need to wait, and if we wait, maybe the wizard will print even some new powerful cards. In example, Initiative, they just printed Monarch 2.0, and maybe thanks to Initiative, maybe thanks to any other engine that will be printed in the next few expansions, we will see a better Pauper format. I'm not sure, because I'm not really having fun to play against too much Boros or Furious Monarch or Affinity. But it's still Magic. I mean, if I really wanted to play something different, I would not have been playing Pauper or Magic. I think it's just different. And you just, if you want to play Pauper or Magic, you just play the current Pauper, the current Magic. If you don't want to, don't play it. Play something else or enjoy something else. Not sure. Whatever. I think we talked about this argument pretty enough. So I'll see you next week. I think, if I remember correctly, I will not have any troublesome, so I'll stream in the same days as always on Twitch, and as always I will upload my usually Twitch replays on YouTube. So see ya guys, have a nice weekend.